The air tasted of metal and damp earth. It was just before 5 in the morning and a low rumble vibrated through the van. It wasn't thunder, it was artillery, distant but close enough to feel. I was somewhere east of Kharkiv, heading toward the front line. The driver, Dmitro, gripped the wheel tighter. The sky was a bruised purple. This was the soundtrack to life here, a constant, menacing hum. The landscape outside was a blur of skeletal trees and ruined buildings. Dmitro spoke, his voice low. "They are active tonight." I had come to Ukraine to investigate whispers, rumors of a new player, North Korea. They spoke of shells, rockets, and perhaps more. I clutched my notebook, feeling both apprehensive and curious. Dmitro pointed ahead. "Almost there, the checkpoint is just past the woods." The woods were dark and dense. This journey was about crossing a threshold. I was about to step over that line. And I was about to learn that the war here had connections that reached further than most people could ever imagine. The rumble outside was a reminder. Here, the day always begins with uncertainty. The van rolled on, deeper into the unknown. The story was just beginning. We arrived at a makeshift military base, camouflaged tents and sandbagged bunkers on an abandoned farm. The air was thick with diesel and frying onions. Soldiers moved with purposeful energy, young, faces smudged with dirt, eyes alert. I felt out of place, a visitor in a world of survival. Amidst the signs of war, life persisted, a soldier cleaning his rifle, another on a video call, a cat sunning itself on ammunition boxes. The mundane sat right next to the terrifying. The landscape itself told a story. Buildings, pockmarked with shrapnel, trees splintered and broken. This region had lived under one authoritarian regime, now fighting another. It felt like a convergence point for the world's ugliest politics. My guide was Lieutenant Serhiy, thoughtful and serious. He led me to a group of soldiers around a small fire. "Welcome to our home," he said with a wry smile. He handed me a chipped enamel mug of thick black coffee. As I sipped, I prepared to ask the questions that brought me here. The soldiers' resilience was palpable. Here, survival was an act of defiance. My journey began in a Kharkiv basement, a command post for civilian volunteers. The air was stale, cables snaked across the floor and maps covered the walls. Here I first heard North Korea mentioned. Katerina, a data analyst, showed me shelling data. "We tracked the type, frequency, and location of craters," she explained. "A few months ago, something changed. The patterns were different, the debris unusual. At first they thought it was old Russian stock, but the markings were wrong, the quality poor, and there were more duds than usual." She showed me photos of twisted metal fragments with faint, unfamiliar stamps. Our contacts at the front noticed it too. The sound is different as it comes in. Soldiers could distinguish the origin of a shell by its sound alone. That solidified my resolve to go to the front. Katerina's data suggested a significant, if low-quality supply line had opened. "They are desperate," she said of the Russians. "They take whatever they can get." The evidence was mounting, and I needed to see it for myself. The shadows from the east were no longer just rumors. I left the basement with more questions than answers, but I knew where I had to go next. The front line was calling. The truth was out there, buried in the mud and metal. At the frontline base, Lieutenant Serhiy confirmed Katerina's story. He led me to a pile of spent shell casings, evidence of a new reality. "This is one of theirs," he said, handing me a heavy, rough cylinder. Near the base Korean characters, faint but unmistakable. Seeing it was like a conspiracy theory made real. Serhiy explained, "These shells are a lottery. Some explode perfectly, some don't. Some explode in the barrel." The unpredictability made Russian artillery less reliable, but also meant they fired more to compensate. The soldiers called them Kim's gifts, a dark joke for a dangerous reality. Alexander, a young soldier, told me a shell landed 20 meters from him. A dud. "Today he saved my life, maybe tomorrow his gift will work." Fatalistic humor was everywhere, a survival mechanism. It wasn't just shells. Serhiy said they'd found remnants of North Korean rockets too. The evidence was mounting, a hidden supply chain feeding the conflict. The war was no longer just about Ukraine's sovereignty, it was a proxy for other tensions. Here, pariah states collaborated, testing weapons and alliances in the mud and blood of the Donbas. The complexity was staggering. Every shell told a story of desperation and defiance. The front line was a laboratory for the world's worst ideas. The soldiers adapted because they had no choice. The war had changed, and so had its weapons. The world needed to pay attention. The cost was measured in lives, not just headlines. The evidence was undeniable. The story was no longer a rumor. It was reality, stamped in steel. And it was still unfolding. The front line was just the beginning. One surprise was the age of the equipment. Serhiy showed me a corroded rocket fin stamped 1,982 inches and a winged horse, the Chollima, a North Korean propaganda symbol. Some munitions were over 40 years old, Soviet-era designs, produced in North Korea and kept in storage. This was the bottom of the barrel, not cutting-edge tech. It spoke volumes about North Korea's stockpiles and Russia's desperation. The Chollima, once a symbol of progress, was now an instrument of a grinding war. The irony was profound. A Cold War relic, still deadly. A mechanic working on a captured Russian tank told me some replacement parts were strange, non-standard, poor quality. He suspected they were North Korean copies of old Soviet parts. They don't last, the steel is bad. The support wasn't just ammunition, it was spare parts, keeping ancient hardware limping along. This revealed a shadow economy of war, a barter network between two isolated sanctioned regimes. Russia traded oil and food, North Korea traded artillery and parts. It was a partnership of convenience, forged in mutual defiance of the West. The soldiers didn't care about geopolitics, they just dealt with the consequences. 40-year-old rockets, shoddy ball bearings, life and death in every detail. The war's complexity was staggering. The front line was a graveyard of old alliances and new realities. The Chollima's mark was everywhere, a symbol of how far the conflict had spread. For the soldiers, it was just another threat. For the world, it was a warning. I spent time with Alexander, the soldier saved by a dud shell. He was only 22, but his movements were deliberate, like an old man's. I asked how he felt about fighting an enemy using North Korean weapons. "It makes me angry," he said. "Russia attacks us and brings their strange friends." The unreliability of Kim's gifts created a new kind of tension. With a normal rocket, you know what it will do. With these, you don't know. Big bang? Small bang? Nothing? This uncertainty was mental warfare, fraying nerves. You gambled not just on your position, but on the quality of a factory thousands of miles away. Alexander had become an expert on North Korean artillery failure rates, a bizarre reality. Their struggle was immense, and this layer of weirdness felt like an insult, yet he found humor. Every dud is one less explosion. Maybe Kim isn't such a good friend to Putin after all. He laughed, a way to find agency in a situation with so little. They turned the enemy's weakness into a small victory. It was hope, in the darkest of places. The human spirit endured, even as the odds grew longer. The front line was a test of resilience, and the soldiers kept finding ways to pass it, even if it meant laughing at the absurdity of war. In the field kitchen, Hannah, a civilian volunteer, stirred a huge pot of borscht. The soldiers called her Mama Hana. She commanded the space with quiet authority. I asked if people talked about the North Korean connection. She shrugged. "We talk about what's trying to kill us today. Russia, Korea, Mars. It makes no difference to the soup." For those living the war, geopolitics was an abstraction. The shell mattered, not its origin. Hannah's focus was on comfort. Enough potatoes for the pot, enough salt to taste like home. Yet the knowledge simmered beneath the surface. Over soup, soldiers discussed the latest batch of shells. Higher failure rates, good for them. They talked about it like farmers discussing the weather, a practical problem to manage. The extraordinary had become ordinary. North Korean artillery was just another feature of the landscape. They had adapted, normalizing the abnormal. When distant alliances become kitchen talk, the world has shifted in a fundamental way. The old rules no longer applied. The war had changed, and so had its people. Survival meant accepting the new reality, even if it made no sense. The conversation moved on, but the implications lingered. The world outside had no idea how much had changed. The human cost became clear in a makeshift clinic in a ruined school's cellar. Dr. Irina, a medic, treated a soldier with a shrapnel wound under dim, battery-powered light. She said injuries had become less predictable. Cheap shells shattered into jagged chunks, causing deep, tearing wounds. Partial explosions sprayed unburnt propellant, causing chemical burns. "It's dirty," she said. "They're throwing garbage at us. We clean up the mess." Her words painted a grim picture of the consequences of substandard weapons. The soldier on the cot was silent, his pain a direct result of a political transaction made far away. Geopolitical games are not played with abstract pieces. They're played with human lives. The decisions of powerful men have brutal, tangible consequences here. The pain is real. The blood is real. Leaving the clinic, the sky was flat and gray, the rumble of artillery constant. Every explosion was a gamble, a roll of the dice loaded by a distant regime. The Russia-North Korea alliance wasn't just a headline, it was a direct assault on Ukrainian bodies, suffering, exported in poorly made steel. The front line was a place where alliances became wounds, the cost was paid in flesh and hope, and the world kept turning. My journey back from the front line was quiet. The mud and skeletal trees looked just as bleak in the fading light. Dmytro drove in silence. My notebook was now full. Scribbled observations, quotes, Korean characters. I'd come seeking a rumor and was leaving with undeniable truth. The war in Ukraine is not a simple, isolated conflict, it's a canvas for global struggles. The fight for Ukraine is also a fight against a network of authoritarian states. North Korean shells in Ukrainian mud are a warning. These regimes cooperate, fueling conflict far from home. What I saw was not strength but profound weakness. An empire in decline, a failed state selling its arsenal for food. Their desperation is dangerous. They break the rules, send Kim's gifts, and see what happens. The world must understand this force. It destabilizes far beyond the battlefield. The most important thing is the people. Serhiy, Alexander, Hanna, Dr. Irina. They face this threat with courage and resilience, laughing at the absurdity even as they tend to the wounds. They're not just fighting for land, they're on the front line of a larger ideological struggle. The cost is immense, the enemy has friends in the darkest places. We ignore their story at our own peril.